The 2020 UN Production Gap Report has reported that the world is heading for a temperature rise in excess of 3 degrees on current emission reduction commitments. In response, leaders around the world are speaking at the COP26 Ambition Summit this Saturday to honour their commitment to act to stay within 1.5 degrees. Is it correct that as a result of your government's failure to commit to increase its ambitions and do what it takes to stay within 1.5 degrees, you're not invited to present at the COP26 Ambition Summit?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I can assure you of this, that Australia's climate and energy policy will be set here in Australia's national interests, not to get a speaking slot at some international summit, Mr Speaker. The only approval I seek for the policies of my government, Mr Speaker, is the Australian people. That's it, Mr Speaker. That's it. The only people I answer to in this place, Mr Speaker, is the Australian people. And our government stands to serve the Australian people. Whatever country that may be, that may seek to impose whatever position on this country, Mr Speaker, Australia's policy will always remain sovereign within our borders and nowhere else, Mr Speaker. But what I can tell the member, and I'm sure she'd be pleased to know, that over the last 2 years, Australia's 2030 position, the Paris targets that we have committed to, has improved by 639 million tonnes, Mr Speaker. This is the equivalent to taking all of Australia's 14.7 million cars off the road for 15 years, Mr Speaker. Our emissions have fallen since 2005 by some 16.6%, Mr Speaker. Over 430 million tonnes.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. The member for Warringah on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question is whether he's presenting at the Ambition
And as I've said many times before, if the member for Warringah had simply just asked that and only asked that, the Prime Minister would have been compelled to give a very specific answer. But unfortunately for her, she included a long preamble that made a number of statements about the subject matter, and that enables the Prime Minister to answer all aspects of what a member asks in their question and not confine him to the preferred aspect, which was the specific question at the end. The Prime Minister is in order.
Mr Speaker, but I do note the point of relevance that the member offered up just now. The member thinks what's relevant is whether you speak at summits or not, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, that is not something that troubles me or concerns me one way or the other. If people wish us to speak at them, we're happy to come. If they don't, I'm not fussed, Mr Speaker. What matters is if you actually reduce emissions. And the 16.6% fall in emissions that we've had since 2005 and since emissions peaked in 2007, almost 20% fall in emissions, Mr Speaker. But on the earlier figures, this compares to a 0 or 0 to 2% fall in like countries like Canada and New Zealand, Mr Speaker. Australia has record investment in renewables. Australia has a plan to put the technology in place to reduce emissions and ensure we achieve the Kyoto, as we already have, and demonstrated that, and importantly the Paris commitments before us, Mr Speaker. What matters is what you get done, and Australia is getting it done on emissions reduction. That's what matters to the Australian people, not how many speeches you give, Mr Speaker, not how much ambition you declare, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I may have an ambition to play front row forward for the Australian Wallabies. But
members on my left,
that ambition won't be realised. But what is being realised, Mr Speaker, is Australia is meeting its emission reduction targets.